Hey there guys, and welcome to this follow-up episode to the introduction episode for episode 1 of our BeamNG random car competition, which is going to be the third video in this series and will air after the follow-up episode before episode 1. Yeah, don't overthink that. Anyway, first and foremost, sorry about the rambling nature of the previous episode. It just boils down to the fact that it's hard to talk and play the video game at the same time. This video should be better, and not to beat around the bush too much, I wanted to talk about the racetrack itself, because right now, it's just way too easy to simply assume that the randomly generated cars will live or die depending on how powerful the engine will end up being for each one, aka that since this is a race and speed is important, that is somehow going to be the deciding factor. But this is where this track comes in. Welcome to Altitude. This map is 4x4 kilometers in size, and its biggest feature is on the screen. The middle of the map is taken up by a huge mountain, which also includes a serpentine road, which makes up for a good portion of this rally course. But let's not rush into it just yet. This course is a rallycross, which of course means that it's going to have both tarmac, gravel, mud, etc. And all the roads involved in this track are actually very uneven and unstable, which means that pure raw power and speed is actually going to be your biggest nightmare. Now, one of the things I had to do in preparation for this video was to take an existing default car from the game and establish a baseline. I will be using the footage from that baseline to show you the track and its features in the meantime. Now, this is how the map looks from above, and the highlighted roads over there are the ones that we are going to be using for this course. And this is the version that shows you different sections. Green is for tarmac, yellow is for gravel, and red is for mud. For the purpose of setting the baseline, I chose this vehicle. It is described as, and I quote, amateur rally car which uses a stock drivetrain but with upgraded brakes, tires, and suspension. I thought that this would be a very good in-between sort of vehicle, considering the monstrosities that a randomized automation car might end up being, on both sides of the spectrum. Anyway, let's take a look at it. The start is the finish line. We'll be returning here at the entrance of this tunnel, and I chose this location simply because it is a part of the mechanically easiest part of the track. And with that in mind, let's go. One of the biggest challenges in the games in terms of not ending up wrapped around a tree is understanding how your car's suspension and weight interacts with the road. Even as something seemingly simple as this little S section right here at the start is actually a lot more dangerous than it looks. Notice how the first turn has this little dip towards the inside? Yeah, you can take that at a fast speed, but the other turn lacks one, so when you take that turn quickly enough, your springs compress, and when you leave that S, they will bounce the vehicle upwards. So if you're actually going fast enough, or if your vehicle's suspension is loose enough, it is going to lose traction, and that's why that tree exists. And then from one speed trap we enter the next one, but this time it punishes underpowered vehicles. Any car going up the slow slope will obviously slow down, but if the vehicle has a rather poor gearbox, it's going to end up shifting between two gears up and down constantly. And, at the same time, the very end of this section holds a surprise for the faster vehicles, as it terminates into this very small left turn, so if you come out of this hill at full speed, you risk either getting enough airtime to just end up in the grass, or at least enough to destabilize your vehicle by losing traction. But the worst is just ahead. This turn. This goddamn turn. Did you think that I just hit those brakes a little bit too aggressively? Yeah, probably, but this turn does not forgive any vehicle going through it at any speed. The problem is that it's a left turn that immediately goes into a slanting right turn, which means that at any speed whatsoever, if you're following the turn and not cutting the corner, you will end up in those trees with any vehicle. This turn is the bane of my existence, and I really hope that the randomized cars are going to have at least some sort of brakes. Now then, the next part of this track is very simple, so let me quickly go over something else. When I create my 5 race cars, I will have a chance to test them on a unrelated track. I will not practice them here. The way that this is going to work is that each car will receive 3 attempts to set the best time on this course. If I end up in a wreck during the lap, I have the ability to reset the vehicle, but I can only do so when the car has come to a complete standstill. The very fact that this will require me to pick up the speed again is a penalty in of itself, but I will be keeping track of the resets just for the fun of it. In the meantime, this part of the track is actually a little bit more steepier than it looks. It's just a zigzag, but in this game, the turning is not instant. The speed at which your steering wheels actually turn from side to side depends on the type of front suspension and the existence of any power steering or whatever. So this zigzag will actually hurt vehicles that have slow steering, as it's very easy to start accelerating before you have the chance to even out, which probably end up with you slamming in the wall if you're not careful enough. Speaking of walls, this spot right now was the fastest tarmac section of the track, but it also terminates into this very narrow bridge thing, which is actually a part of 2 consecutive speed traps. One, you just saw already, but the whole roll geometry after this half-tunnel thing is just completely screwed up. It's specifically designed to punish low or sport suspension cars that will have to brake hard before hitting this mud section, otherwise they run the risk of breaking something. Again, the game is not going to not break your vehicle just because you keep on track. You have to be smart about it. Just the same, the slower vehicles that have good ground clearance will be able to take advantage of this wall ride thing. Next up, however, is our first of the 2 pure gravel sections, and it's peppered by little bits of mud that is going to cause steering challenges for any vehicle that is too close to the ground. Again, our car is a very middle-esque in terms of actual horsepower, and yet its suspension has been improved, so we get through this relatively easy. Now then, as the course progresses, we will be entering a series of very narrow roads, which are very rough in their overall geometry, which will induce a lot of bounciness to cars with poor suspension, and will make faster vehicles brake much more often than usual. There are very many places here to gain air, as you will see in a moment, and as there's not a lot of portions to specifically address here, let's go further into the details about the game and vehicle mechanics. The cars exported from automation tend to be a little bit more sturdier than their default counterparts, and that has to do with the fact that apart from fixtures you place on the vehicles such as lights and such, the body itself is completely uniform, aka doors, paneling, the hood/trunk lids. They're not separate parts that can be torn off, and so it adds a certain amount of rigidity to the vehicle's body. But I cannot say that that's a good thing, because that same flex in default cars usually makes the vehicle a little bit more stable, especially for cars with very stiff suspension. So if we end up with a lowrider or something with very stiff springs, we will end up in a situation where the car will actually be severely hindered by its handling rather than its raw performance. The further we go down this part of the course, the worse the road damage becomes. Every single part of this track involves some sort of speed trap, especially a rather nasty upcoming left turn, which is situated at the start of a small gravel patch, which requires you to brake harder than it seems. Likewise, you get many places where these bumps and little hills are placed next to small turns, which look harmless enough, but they become problematic whenever you end up lifting off while steering, which might often result in your vehicle losing traction once it touches the ground again. You know, it's kind of funny that the physically fastest part of this course is situated not only at the end of the lap, but it also takes place on a gravel road of all places. This hairpin turn is actually very good for situations where if you have taken any sort of damage until now, it will allow you to reset your vehicle and start moving without too much of a penalty, since the U-turn makes you almost stop anyway, because you need a completely undamaged car to get through what happens next. A sudden and very steep downhill gravel road with small rocks on either side, and with the road slant going to the outside of the turn, not the inside, meaning that if you go too fast, you will end up in the rocks, but good luck braking hard enough to actually make it through. This section is cruel to slower cars simply because this is the one time for them to actually take advantage of a downhill situation, but in most cases they're not equipped to deal with the upcoming turns. Again, our car is the perfect in-between vehicle when it comes to the possible combinations that automation might spit out for us. Since we will be choosing random chance to select all the components and settings, it will be genuinely hard to, quote, tailor a vehicle for this course, and I think that is one of the things that's going to be really fun in general. Now, if I had to hazard a guess, the worst case scenario for this track in terms of the vehicle design might be something along the lines of a roadster or a muscle car sort of thing. You know, rear-wheel drive, lots of torque, or even worse, a turbo that engages at a very high RPM, which would mean huge amounts of wheel spin and just general instability. Honestly, with a total lap time of 6 minutes and 41 seconds, I am very hesitant to say that any of our automation cars will do any better than this. Again, the track is not meant for raw speed, but a regular oval would be just boring. But anyway, that's it for this video. This was the track, this is our baseline, and now it's time for us to build our first monster.